have Leslie Manookian in. We're going to be talking about, well, RFK Jr., autism, Idaho, and the work that you've done there for healthcare freedom or medical freedom. And I think that probably for my audience and for all of America, even those who didn't vote for President Donald Trump, as they should have, consider MAGA to be one of the most important milestones in the history of the United States of America, at least in the last 100 years. That there's so many ways that you could categorize and divvy that up. But if MAGA is successful, as RFK Jr. Commits, and as the president did when he joined forces with RFK Jr., then America will be changed for hundreds of years in the future, and that makes it always a worthy topic. Hello, Leslie. Thank you for joining me.
So great to be with you, Elizabeth. Thanks so much for having me.
Leslie, I saw your post after RFK Jr.'s Senate testimony, which was not his testimony, but it was as the usual circus or carnival or whatever. It's just so crazy, the attacks upon his character and the work that they're doing in, Health and Human Services and all the rest of the agencies underneath that. But I saw that you put up what I consider to be a very little basic primer. And that was really the 3 legislative actions taken by Congress that turned us from primarily a healthy nation to one of the sickest nations on the face of the earth, despite our wealth, despite our privileges as living in this country, being Americans. We are, especially our children, so terribly ill. And I think it starts to a great deal, maybe going back to the 70s, because I think the food pyramid started in the 70s. But in 1980 is when you started that little timeline, very short timeline. I want to go over that. First, introduce yourself and tell us what you did in Idaho that was so groundbreaking, that sets Idaho apart from every other state in this great republic.
Sure. So I'm a former Wall Street banker, executive. I managed, I worked at Goldman Sachs for a little less than 5 years. And then I ran Alliance Capital, their European growth portfolio management and research businesses for like 6 or 7 years. I forget how long it was exactly. And I left in order to basically play for the right team. I felt like I was doing things that were not in service to God or my purpose. I felt like what I was doing was destroying my soul, and I just had to get out. And so I ultimately quit, and I went and I started becoming a homeopath, studying homeopathy and learning about holistic medicine. And I was shocked by what I learned. I was also shocked by some of the things I heard on Wall Street, which I can go into. I don't know if you've ever heard this story.
How long ago? I want to hear that, but how long ago did you leave Wall Street, if you will?
2003. July of 2003 was my last time at the firm and in finance. Mm-hmm. It was shortly after, like 10 months after my son was born.
And so you decided, did you move from New York to Idaho, or were you in Idaho at the time in 2000?
I was in London, actually. I was living in London, England, because I went to business school, got hired by Goldman, moved to New York and worked for them in New York. And then they transferred me to London, and I worked for them there for a couple of years. And then there are so many conflicts of interest inherent to an investment bank, and it was just uncomfortable for me. And I just didn't feel that it was right. I felt like you're just always kind of bumping up against this inappropriateness on some level.
Unethical decisions that you have to make, or at least you have to struggle with.
Yeah, just things that just didn't seem totally right. Mm-hmm. It's like I never met anybody who was awful or just a,
monster,
a criminal or like that. But the point is that when you work at an investment bank like Goldman Sachs, you are working in an environment where there's half the bank is catering to institutional investors' clients, and half the bank is dealing with corporate clients, meaning the businesses. Well, the investors and the corporations are at odds with one another. And so there's this inherent conflict that is not really understood by the lay public, essentially, by the general public.
I didn't understand it. I probably still don't, but I mean, at least you've given me a window into it.
Yeah.
So in 2003, you're in London and you decide to go into homeopathy.
Yeah. So what happens is I go and I start studying homeopathy. And in the very first session, the orientation, I hear about the whole vaccine debate. I hear we're going to study all of these different issues over the next 3 years. We're going to study the mind-body connection. We're going to study nutrition and obstacles to cure and vaccine damage. And I was like, I literally raised my hand and said, what are you talking about? Vaccines are the greatest invention.
And you have a 10-month-old child who they want to jack.
This was before my son was born, because I actually started studying on the side on weekends in the fall of 2001, and my son wasn't born until the fall of 2002. So by 2003, I was, really questioning everything. And during this same time period, Elizabeth, something profound happened to me, which is that the CEO of one of the biggest pharmaceutical companies in the world came into our offices to reassure us, as some of their biggest investors, that their new drug was going to be okay. They were still going to make a lot of money on it. And what he said to us was, listen, the FDA is going to make us put this little warning on our packaging. It's called a black box warning. And he said, few people have died. The FDA is going to make us put this warning on our packaging. The good news is we still think we can do $7 billion in peak sales. And I was just like, I felt like someone had kicked me in the stomach. I was so upset. I couldn't even believe it. So that happened somewhere in 2000, 2001. I forget exactly what the date was. But that just ripped the veil from my eyes. I mean, I was freaking out. I could not believe that someone would be so cavalier in their assessment of the trade-off between human life and corporate profit. And so this is what was really driving home for me, that I was not serving a higher purpose and that I needed to do something different. So then you fast forward and I start homeopathy school on the weekends in the fall of 2001, and I learned about the vaccine debate, and I couldn't believe it. I thought this guy was a nut job. And after the class, he gave me a book and he's like, here, read this book. And I went home and read it. And I literally cried for days, because I'm this analyst geek person by nature. And so I'm like, where are the footnotes? I mean, what's going on here? I look in the back and there are over 960 footnotes documenting a huge spectrum of injury, disability, and death from normal vaccinations. And I was aghast. I couldn't believe it. I took the book the next weekend of the classes in my hand and walked into the president of the college's office. And I'm like, how can this be true? I was like half crying and half yelling. And she just shrugged her shoulders and was like, sorry to burst your bubble, miss, your little worldview, but money, power, lots of things. And I think because I'd had the experience a year or two before with the CEO reassuring me that they're going to make billions and thinking I'm going to be cheering and happy.
Knowing a certain percentage of people will die. And really, I think just a side note is this, that, we all see the commercials and everybody has their scenario where, you got the family. With me, it's my 90-year-old mother, my husband, the kids are all gone. And one of those commercials comes up and they're trying to get rid of acid reflux or something. But you may end up having suicidal ideations, depression, heart attacks, cancer. I don't know. The list goes on. But what they do is everybody's playing, ping pong and smiling, and everybody's just talking like this as they repeat all the deadly side effects that are potentially, that are associated with that particular medication. And we realize that people are going to just go for acid reflux or whatever it is and take the medication anyway, because we've been trained. So that black box warning that he was, I want to let you know that we are going to have that black box warning, but so many people will just ignore it, and doctors that will dispense it, that we're still going to make $7 billion or whatever the total was.
And the thing is, Elizabeth, the forecast initially had been $10 billion in peak sales, and now they're saying $7 billion. So it's like, hey, it's disappointing. It's not as high as we thought, but we're still going to knock the ball out of the park, kind of a thing. And I'm just aghast. But I think because of that experience, when I started learning this stuff about the vaccine debate, I was horrified, aghast, and incredibly skeptical. But on some level, deep down, there was this part of me that knew that it was possible. Mm-hmm. It was possible vaccines cause autoimmune disease, rheumatoid arthritis, learning disabilities, speech delays, neurodevelopmental problems, autism, seizures, and even death. I just knew it because the guy just told me he was going to sell his drugs and kill people at the same time. He knew people were going to die. And so it wasn't out of the ballpark for me anymore, right? It was not completely out of the realm of comprehension.
You had the little light bulb go off saying, I need to at least reorient, do a paradigm shift where I may not know it all. I may not have arrived at conclusions, but I'm no longer going to be mindless, asleep about this issue.
Exactly. And so what happened was in that moment, as I'm sitting there half crying and half screaming or shouting at her, I just felt called by God that one day I was going to make a movie on this subject and learn for myself what was really true and share it with the whole world. And I started doing research then and there on vaccines. And I ended up making an award-winning documentary called The Greater Good, which you can find at greatergoodmovie.org.
Thank you.
And it was so, in some ways, so far ahead of its time that a lot of people didn't get it. It's been seen by tens of millions of people, at least 20 million people. We think possibly more than that, closer to 30 at this point.
That's awesome.
And it came out in 2011. But what's really interesting, Elizabeth, is that it resonates more deeply today than it did 15 years ago, 14 years ago when it first came out, because now the general public has a frame of reference for it. They know they've been misled by the federal government about masks, about this social distancing nonsense, about, plexiglass around their children. They know that lockdowns and using children as human shields was just garbage. Like, the point is now they get it, they see it. And so now when they watch it, they're like, they have this just visceral response to it. And so that was like one of the, I became a homeopath after a few years. In 2004, I got my credential. And then but I was really just raising my up.
Tell me what being a homeopath really is.
Yeah. So it's interesting. Americans, because homeopathy has been so derided, pilloried, and attacked for 150 years. It's been really since the 1840s, actually. So we're coming up to 200 years. Yeah. Homeopathy has been so attacked that most Americans don't actually even know what it is. It's not naturopathy. Naturopaths or naturopathy, that's general practice of holistic medicines. So a naturopathic doctor is someone who they will go to school and they will learn all the anatomy and physiology that doctors learn. They learn, all the organ systems and immune systems and all these kinds of things. They learn about nutrition and supplements. They may learn acupuncture. They may learn some other healing modalities. They may learn homeopathy. So they will do a year in that, maybe. Homeopaths will study it for 3 to 5 years generally. And homeopathy is a system of medicine that's over 200 years old. It was developed by a German physician in the late 1700s named Dr. Samuel Hahnemann, who was essentially aghast and ashamed that he was a doctor and was harming patients. He was a devout, and he was horrified that they were making all sorts of some assumptions about what was going on inside the human body and then treating people with all manner of toxins based on all these assumptions. And he's like, this is outrageous. We're just guessing, and we're
throw it up against the wall. See what sticks.
We're painting people's throats with mercury and arsenic when they have a sore throat. We're putting mercury-laced creams on people. We are treating syphilis with mercury. We are letting people's blood and attaching tremendous leeches to them. Most people don't know this. They think that George Washington. The
moment you said leech, exactly, he died.
He died from bloodletting. They let 4 pints of his blood in the hours that preceded his death. They killed him. Did they mean to kill him? No.
Yeah.
But this was the lunacy back then in the late 18th century. And so Samuel Hahnemann, he was like, I can't participate in this anymore. I don't want to harm people. And I'm harming people. And these doctors have no idea what they're doing. So he basically started attacking his own profession and exposing them for the quacks that they were. But he just said, I'm going to focus on one thing, and that is translating documents. And so research papers. He was a polymath. He spoke 8 languages, read and wrote them fluently. And so people would send him their scientific papers and he would translate them into different languages. And what he ended up doing was discovering what's homeopathy. And homeopathy is a system of medicine that's based on the principle that like cures like, and that when you take all sorts of substances, even highly toxic ones, and you dilute them, what happens is you dilute them to the point where you eliminate any of the toxicity of the substance, but you retain the healing properties. And he was the first person, he really developed the double-blind scientific method. And he did this so the first thing he ever studied, and this is how he kind of cottoned onto this, was that he was just this brilliant man, one of these super creative inventor types. And someone sent him a manuscript saying that quinine cures malaria or treats malaria because it's astringent, meaning it's kind of like vinegary, puckery, it's acidic. And he said, that can't be right. There are lots of things that are astringent and they don't have any of these properties. That just doesn't make any sense. And so he brewed up his own cocktail of quinine. Quinine is made from the Peruvian bark of the bark of the Peruvian cinchona tree. Okay? So he brewed it up and he started taking it over a period of days. And guess what happened? He developed debilitating night sweats, delirium, fever and delirium, like unbelievable delirium and fevers, intermittent fevers. He developed unbelievable confusion, all the symptoms of malaria he developed from taking his tincture. So then he reasoned, well, gosh, if it causes this in its full, gross form, maybe that's why it's helping people in a more diluted form in quinine, which only has a residual amount. So then he started playing around and he started diluting the substance even more. And what he found was that what it caused in its gross form, if he diluted it to the point where it didn't cause any more harm, and he succussed it, which meant to shake it and hit it, he would dilute it on a scale of 1 to 10 or 1 to 100, then it would retain all the healing properties and it would have no harm. That is what homeopathy is. And homeopathy was flourishing so profoundly all across Europe and the United States in the first half of the 19th century that the medical doctors attacked it. And so if you look, in 1843, the American Institute of Homeopathy was founded. It wasn't until 1846 that the American Medical Association was founded. And it was founded in direct response to the Homeopathic Association. And somebody, actually one of the prominent doctors who was part of the AMA, said, we didn't have any quibble with homeopathy. We just don't like that they move into our neighborhoods and take away all of our patients. It was purely financial. And the thing is, what happened was there were, at the turn of the 20th century, over 100 homeopathic hospitals in the United States, actually over 100 homeopathic schools, and 20 homeopathic hospitals. Now, maybe it's the opposite. I'm forgetting now. It's either 20 hospitals. There were a lot. My point is, it was widespread used, and it was used by royalty and heads of state. It was extremely common. Abraham Lincoln used it. It was all part of that whole era. Many, many people in the United States and all over Europe used it. And it was this huge threat to the pharmaceutical industry and to Rockefeller's oil-based, petroleum-based business, which part of what that was chemical-based medicines. And so they did everything in their power to put it out of business. And that's why Americans don't know about it. But let me jump forward. So basically, I'm studying this. I learn about all of these problems with the shots. I just decide I'm going to make a movie someday. And so, I'm a young child, and on the side, I just start studying all this stuff. And we very, I don't know, at the time we thought we were being extremely bold, maybe on the border of reckless. We didn't vaccinate our son because of what I was learning. We were freaking out. And, at the time I thought, man, this is really kind of scary and kind of crazy. But what ended up happening was that proved to be the smartest decision that we ever made. And so I made the documentary, and that's what really catapulted me into the whole health freedom movement and really impressed upon me the imperative of health freedom. And so when 2020 started, I'd been researching these issues for 20 years, and I started Health Freedom Defense Fund. And Health Freedom Defense Fund is the nonprofit that filed a lawsuit challenging the federal mask mandate and stopped the federal mask mandate for all travel and everything in 2022. So that was us. And we've also sued the federal government 4 times. I haven't lost yet. We haven't won outright every time, but all of our arguments is because they dismissed the cases once the emergency was rescinded to get rid of the cases, not because the case merits. This is the game they play. So anyway, I started Health Freedom Defense Fund, and our whole purpose is to educate people about their health rights and then help them advocate for them and then litigate when those health rights are infringed. So we filed, I don't know how many lawsuits it is in the last 5 years. And we have really been making serious headway into protecting our health freedoms. And part and parcel of the thing was the Idaho Medical Freedom Act. That's why I wanted to come full circle so you knew where I was going.
Well, I got to tell you, some of the most fun conversations that I have are the ones where I start a conversation about something I've seen or something that's interesting out there, and then I get an education on something related. But I am so fascinated by this beginning of our conversation, the homeopathy, Samuel Hahnemann, the AMA, dark beginnings. I mean, from poisonous acorns, a huge tree has grown. The petroleum connection there at the end, it all starts to make so much more sense. It's always about money. The love of money is the root of all evil. And I'm so glad that the Lord drew you away from your previous profession. And this is like what being a Renaissance person, this is what sort of America cultivates in its citizenry, is that we can leave one practice, one discipline or job, whatever work, and move to something else, like a Ben Franklin, a Renaissance man, of his own right. And it doesn't require that you've spent 40 years, I don't know, when they
ABM or something.
Exactly. When Pete Hegseth was nominated for the Department of Defense, now the Department of War, he hadn't been a general for 25 years following the party line in the Pentagon. And so therefore he was not qualified to be the Secretary of Defense. Well, we all know that that's really not the way America was founded. We were founded on people becoming expert in one area, moving on to another. If you're inquiring, if you're intelligent, if you have the drive and determination, and you brought a lot more to this conversation than I anticipated to begin with. So thank you. Blessings to you for doing that. So you started this organization, this advocacy organization. Where do you get your attorneys? Do you just do you have attorneys on staff or that volunteer for you?
This is the kind of stuff that you can never, ever plan, right? So my husband and I had an investment in this business probably started in 2017 or something like that. And the company was trying to raise more money and asking those who'd already invested to invest more. And we were nervous about doing that. And they said, oh, well, we're teaming up with these attorneys in Northern Idaho, and they're going to be helping do all these different things, maybe doing like a crypto or something alongside the business. It was like an energy business. And you should talk to the attorneys and see what you think. And so through this completely unrelated situation, these extremely successful international litigators were brought into my life. And I started having conversations in November and December of 2019. And we had kind of hit it off. We were having some more conversations in January and February. And by then I started telling the lead that I was in contact with the most, started telling him about the whole vaccine debate. I was telling him about how you can't sue the vaccine manufacturer, how there's no due process or discovery. And he kept saying, that can't be right,
That's
Leslie.
Impossible.
It's impossible. And he's like, I've given 40 years of my life to the law. This can't be right. And then he would go and he would ship. And of course, he would come back and tell me, you're right. Can't believe it. I told him there was a whole vaccine court that's set up, that there's a tax on every vaccine of 75% that goes into a trust fund to pay out the victims of vaccine injury and death. He was just stunned, utterly stunned, speechless at all. But
excuse me, let me just, one little side note. So they tax a vaccine, which the insurance companies end up paying for. So our insurance premiums go up. And what we're really doing is funding, it's sort of a welfare program, a trust fund for, it's corporatism, but it's in the medical field.
Yes, but Elizabeth, I wouldn't put it that way at all, because these are people who have been harmed, whose
I
children
want them
have
to
been...
get the money, but what I'm saying is it's ironic.
Not welfare in any way.
No,
what
no,
it is
I meant welfare for the vaccine manufacturers, for Pfizer or whoever else.
It very much is. It's outrageous. So in what happened in the late 1970s, a lot of people, a lot of parents were filing lawsuits against the vaccine makers because their children were being injured and killed by the DPT shot, the diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus shot. And so they were filing lawsuits. This is in like 75, 76, 77, 78. And juries were awarding them huge settlements. They were getting $4 million, $8 million, $18 million, which back then was a heck of a lot of money.
That was a lot of money back in the 70s.
Really a lot of money.
Yeah.
Until the pharmaceutical industry was feeling, hey, this isn't profitable for us. They went to Congress and they said, hey, you know what? We're just going to stop making vaccines unless you shield us from liability.
Indemnify.
Yeah. And so Congress obliged by passing the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act of 1986, which recognized that vaccines injure and kill some recipients, and set up all of these programs ancillary to the act, one of which was the vaccine court. Another one is the Vaccine Injury Compensation Program.
Let's go through the timeline. Let's go back to 1980. I want to say first, though, I remember way back then, my first kid, she was fully vaccinated. But did you go through sort of the experience? Well, you hadn't recognized this until the 2003 period, or 2001 to 2003. For me, as a mother, and looking at what I was reading, just the hints, and of course, everybody who brings up vaccines, I don't remember when the first perhaps nationwide controversy became, it like rose to the top of our consciousness and, on the radar screen, that we're listening to this and we're thinking there's something that makes sense here, or that it's very worrisome, and the answers don't sound great, but everybody is being painted as a person wearing a tinfoil hat, and you can't get answers. You can almost, especially back in the 80s, almost look at it as if like, well, the government would the government really do this to us? I mean, I think we were a little more naive back in the 80s than we were in the 2000s. That was a terrible time. And I think all the way up to 2024, when RFK Jr. came on the scene, or no, when COVID came on the scene. And then those years, so 2020 is when the revelation and the exposure and the recognition of the corruption and the gaslighting and the just pure lies and censorship. So, from the 80s or before to 2020, we were all just lemmings. And those of us who had those reservations, we were still unsure. And I feel so badly for all the parents who suffered the consequences of the vaccines. I did not have to.
Yeah, let me share that I think it was in 1980, CBS did a piece. Even, I think 60 Minutes did some stuff. They did on the swine flu vaccine. Swine flu vaccine injured and paralyzed tons of people. I think it killed 30 or 40 people in the United States in 1976, and it paralyzed hundreds. And these people were all paid out. And 60 Minutes did an expose on that. So it wasn't completely out of the public consciousness. It was actually treated and dealt with in some ways by the media. The pain just got bigger and bigger and bigger. And so then it got to the point where you couldn't question anything. But before that happened, in the early 1980s, I think it might have been 1980, there was a piece produced by a woman named Leah Thompson. She worked for CBS, and she did a whole program. It might have been called A Shot in the Dark, a 30-minute show on the dangers of the DPT shot. And it was, it kind of opened the floodgates. People started to realize that there was a real problem. And this is when you're seeing all these lawsuits happening. And so it was actually a big kind of thing for some people. But of course, unless you're really paying attention, you may not notice it or hear about it. And back then also, people were pretty naive. They still actually did believe that the government was there to protect them. Because when I read that book, I was like, wait, if this is true, it means they're knowingly injuring and killing our most vulnerable and our most innocent. This is in 2001, and I didn't want to believe it. That's the most life-altering idea to actually take on board, right? To assimilate into your consciousness, that your government will betray you with respect to your most precious charges, your babies, your newborn baby. They will literally recommend hepatitis B vaccine to a newborn baby, 6 hours old, for no reason.
My last daughter was born in 2000, and at the hospital, they wanted me to give her that vaccination. I said no. Then when she was still, I don't know what age this was, but within the first year of her life, when I was at the doctor, they were looking at me like I was nuts because I said, no, I'm not going to do this. So I was aware enough and had been becoming leery. Actually, my second to last daughter didn't have most of her shots. I stopped that. And so I don't know what would have happened to those two girls if I had gone ahead with the shots. But by the fifth one, it was over. There was not going to be any more. But she looked at me like I was nuts, and I was saying she's not a prostitute. And as far as I know, she's not on IV drugs. So I'm just going to wait for a while, which she never got. Yeah, I know.
Well, you know what happened was the reason that they mandated that shot and recommended it at birth is because there was a headline in the New York Times that said, if adults won't take it, we'll just give it to babies. It's in my movie. Literally, that's what it was. You know what? Sex workers and IV drug users don't go to the doctor that much, so they didn't penetrate the market very well. They wanted to recoup their investment, so they got the health authorities to oblige and recommend the shot for newborn babies. Freaking sick. It's sick. These people are sick.
Can I ask you? Oh, I'm sorry. Because I want to go through that timeline because you started kind of in the middle, and it's, to me, the succinctness of it, those 3 acts, and maybe some other things that you want to add to it. Before we start that, I want to ask you this. I was looking at RFK Jr., some post about him, and he was explaining how the mortality of associated with particular diseases plummeted before vaccines were introduced for a whole host of them. I'm not saying it's all of them, but for a whole host of them. And of
Yes,
course, it is. And that was...
There have been two really good studies done on this. One is McKinley. The McKinleys did some research on this, and there are these amazing charts that show, the deaths rate, and it's just like this. But then there's even another study that was done, and that was conducted using U.S. government data, and it was published by Guyer et al., Guyer et al., in June of 2000 in the Journal of Pediatrics. And that was an assessment, an analysis of American federal government data dating back from the Civil War to the current time, analyzing the impact on infectious disease mortality of all these different measures. And what the authors concluded, published in Pediatrics, the Bible Journal of the American Academy of Pediatrics. Let me just say, as an aside, the American Academy of Pediatrics is a trade group, folks. It's a trade group. It's not governmental. They take millions from the pharmaceutical industry. Coca-Cola used to, I don't know if they do anymore, but used to sponsor their events. You don't take the oil industry lobby group as word for the safety of, emissions from your car, do you? You wouldn't accept that. But we're taking it from the American Academy of Pediatrics whenever it comes to shots. Anyway, I have to say that because it's so important.
No, that's important to put out there.
Yeah. But so what happened was they analyzed this data, and it was published in their journal. And it's literally U.S. government data. And it specifically said that 89%, said nearly 90% of the decline in infectious disease mortality in the United States in the 20th century occurred before the widespread use of either antibiotics or vaccines. So they said, thus, vaccination does not account for the dramatic decrease we've seen in infectious disease mortality. 90% of it came before those things ever before. And what should we attribute all of these successes? It was just public health measures. They started getting, if you look back at photographs from the late 19th century and early 20th century, New York City was 3 feet deep in animal feces. There was open sewers behind everyone's shanties. It was just despicable. Like, we're talking a horrible way to be living. There was no clean water, no refrigeration. There was not fresh food. And you had sewage everywhere. And yes, people were sick. People were sick and people were dying because they were being exposed to all sorts of bacteria and pathogens and toxins constantly. And once they started implementing sanitation systems, drinking water systems, getting fresh food, cleaning up the streets in the cities,
refrigeration.
Yeah, refrigeration, absolutely. Once that happened, you saw a steady decline. And so I believe, are falsely attributing these improvements. I don't just believe it. I mean, the data proves it. 90% of it happened before ever these vaccines or antibiotics were used. It was because of public health.
Public health and also innovations such as, refrigeration that you mentioned, but also just public hygiene, having a clean
water.
Yes.
Getting sanitation, sewer systems so that it's not just out in the streets. Yeah.
And this is why third world nations like India still have tremendous issues, because you can't inoculate yourself against incredible pollution and pollution of water, pollution of the ground, pollution of, everything. Okay. So I was going to ask you
if the world had fresh drinking water, one of the biggest killers in the world is diarrheal diseases from diarrhea. If we had fresh drinking water, that would plummet, and that would severely reduce the amount of mortality that we see in the developing world, no doubt. So yeah, but we're told that they need to be vaccinated when the truth is, if you're playing soccer in a cesspool, you're going to get sick. No vaccination is going to help you with that.
I remember thinking about Israel, of course, is the epicenter of water science, and they have pioneered everything way back from the 40s with drip and 50s, 60s with the drip irrigation. I remember thinking about California when it was going through years ago, another drought and fires and all the rest. And I thought, surely the California government. I no longer live there for good reason, but surely they're probably on the phone with Israel. I mean, because Israel has machines where you can just get a glass of water because it's drawing water from the air. Israel literally just get a glass. You can produce water in your own house just with a machine or in a mall, wherever. And the drip irrigation saved, I don't know, trillions and trillions of gallons or whatever every year of fresh water going into the ground, because drip irrigation is like 10,000 times better than spraying, but also the desalinization that Israel really produces all its own water and sells it off to Jordan, the excess. But they also can clean their water so thoroughly that they can use it, the water that has been used, they can clean it so well that it can actually be used in agriculture, which you can't use wastewater in agriculture because, normally, but their technology allows it. And what I was just thinking is, if we were not spending billions or trillions, I don't know the numbers, on vaccines that actually are killing and harming, we used to have the food pyramid that I thought when I was a kid in school, we learned the food pyramid. I believed it. Why would somebody lie to me? All of those things that we have had since 80s, 70s, if we put that in water or other kinds of new technologies that give us health around the world, I'm talking about. I mean, we've got good water here in America. Sorry for that little side note there, but I'm just thinking of India, which is so filthy and they have no toilets. The reason they're sick is because they don't have toilets and they don't have clean drinking water and clean rivers. So forget about Israel, water, and all the rest of that. Our governments should be putting their money into infrastructure that maintains health.
People say, oh, Bill Gates, he's always trying to do good. Bill Gates really wanted to help the world. Wouldn't he just drill wells?
Mm-hmm.
Instead, what does he do? There's no talk about that. It's all about the decade of vaccinations. This is what his whole thing is. And what you never hear in the mainstream is that his vaccine programs, they claim to have eradicated polio from India. The truth is that his vaccine programs have maimed or killed over 500,000 children who received the polio vaccine that he's administering, the oral polio vaccine. Literally, in the places
have not
where
heard
it's
that.
Unbelievable, hundreds of thousands. It's over 500,000. And it's just concealed. My point is that you're 100% right, that there are many ways, many innovations that we could engage in order to improve health outcomes and overall help the people on the planet. The reality is that we have starvation and filth and all of these, deprivations across the world because some people want it that way, because they profit off of it.
Because Bill Gates is evil. I believe in good and evil. My Bible tells me so. And whenever you see the reason that he does anything and the kinds of things he gets his fingers and toes dipped into, it's always something that brings harm. I remember reading some study that exposed that these vaccinations, I think it was purely vaccinations of some sort, that they were actually sterilizing women in Africa because they're adding other ingredients, active ingredients, that either in combination, maybe even independently, they wouldn't do that, but in combination. Tell me about that.
So the World Health Organization, this is just another thing to understand. The World Health Organization has been lacing tetanus vaccines with something called HCG, human chorionic gonadotropin. Women, that's the pregnancy hormone. That's the hormone that your body starts producing when you are pregnant. Okay? So if you put that into a vaccine and inject it, your body is going to mount a response to that to stop the production of HCG, which means you'll never be able to carry a pregnancy again. And they have been busted doing this in Kenya, Mexico, the Philippines. the World Health Organization has been using and are researching how to use vaccines as a means of controlling fertility, i.e. sterilizing people, since the 70s. The World Health Organization. So they put this in, and what happened was the Catholic Church in Kenya thought it was odd that the World Health Organization was recommending the DPT shot, diphtheria, pertussis, and tetanus shot, only for women of age like 14 to 40. Why were they only telling women of childbearing age and nobody else to get it? Well, that's why, because they wanted to impair their fertility. So that's what they did. Yeah, so much.
So let's go to
The timeline.
the timeline.
Yeah.
Tell us the timeline of how the transformation of our medical industry or our government agencies that are supposed to protect the health and welfare of the American public, and how those were transformed into profit centers and corrupt bureaucracies. Go ahead.
Yeah, and let me just say, as a preface to all of this knowledge and research that I have and have done is what prompted me to write the Idaho Medical Freedom Act and get the Idaho Medical Freedom Act passed this past legislative session.
Congratulations.
Because it's very, very clear to me, based on my last 25 years of experience, the federal government is not protecting us. That doesn't seem to be their objective in any way. It seems to be to actually erode our rights, take away our rights. And so I felt that the only way that we are going to, stem the tide is to take things into our own hands in our own states.
Let me ask you, is that being used anywhere else? Because often legislation that is successful and notably good is then taken to other states. Is that happening?
So this is landmark legislation. Idaho is the first state in the nation, I believe the first place anywhere in the world, to pass a law that bans outright medical mandates for almost everyone. So no medical interventions may be mandated in the state of Idaho for almost anyone, which is pretty astounding. No chips, no devices, no tests, no masks, no injections, creams, pills, no medications, no monitors, no nothing can be forced on you in order to live a normal life. It's pretty amazing. And yes, a couple of states, I'm working with some other groups to roll this out to other states. And so I think next year in the legislative session, we'll see it introduced in some states. But so let me just come back to what.
Let's go back. Yes. Go.
Yeah, so in 1980, Congress passed something called the Bayh-Dole Act. And the Bayh-Dole Act allows scientists who are paid by taxpayer dollars, so federal scientists who are paid off of your back, to retain the intellectual property rights, the patent rights to certain products that they may develop while they're under the employ of the federal government. So it turned them. They claimed at the time, oh, we have to do this because we have a brain drain and we can't retain any good scientists, and so we need to do something to pay them in order to retain the good scientists. That's what they said. But of course, what it did was it completely misaligned the interests of those scientists from the public they were supposed to serve into their own profit center, and also the corporations that they worked with. And the reason I say that, the corporations part, is people may not realize this, but the NIAID, Fauci's agency, actually developed the Moderna vaccine and owned half the patent on it, owns half the patent on it. So they have a vested interest. They can make $150,000 a year per patent on this products that they develop. And what people don't understand is that then changed CDC and NIH from public health agencies focused on protecting us to profit centers for those agencies. NIH and CDC both own patents on vaccines. The Gardasil vaccine for HPV was partly developed by federal scientists. So was the Moderna shot.
So let me, this is a question I've always wanted to ask about this. I don't know how many scientists are at the CDC or NIH. I'm just trying to envision, there's 100, there's 20, there's 2,000. I don't know how many there. And are those individual scientists assigned a particular project and then who gets that commission, if you will, or that override on this new medication or pharmaceutical product of some sort? How is that divvied up? Do you have any idea?
Well, the individual scientists who work on the project, they get to take 150 grand a year. So if you look at Fauci's team, it was like half a dozen of them or so helped to develop the Moderna
and so for the
shot.
rest of their lives, as long as that drug, and I don't know what happens when they pass on, if they can pass that on to their progeny, but that was one of the most horrific. Can you spell fire, by the way, because I don't think people will know.
By Dole, is that what you mean?
Oh, By. That's what I meant. By Dole. Yeah.
It was Evan By, I think was his name. BAY8 dash Dole, as in Bob Dole.
Bob Dole.
So I think By was a Dem and Dole was a Republican.
Dole was a Republican. Do you think that they knew what they were doing, or is this one of those stupid unintended? Yeah, it just doesn't make any sense. Okay, so that was That was 1980, and then in 1986, they passed the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act. So that just literally blew open the doors for the vaccine industry. The pharmaceutical industry all of a sudden could make vaccines without any liability. Congress shielded them. Reagan signed it against his better judgment, supposedly. Did he say that?
Yeah. He felt like he was conflicted about it, but he signed it, and it went into law. And then what happened was the vaccine schedule in the United States tripled. So kids get more than 3 times the doses of antigens that kids got back in of different vaccines that kids got back in 1983, for instance. Unbelievable what happened. And then to make matters worse, so now basically the pharmaceutical industry has a free pass to print money because the government is mandating these shots in the states. The federal government is the largest purchaser of vaccines through the Vaccines for Children program. And the CDC, part of its mission, they say, is to promote vaccines and monitor the safety of them. So do you think they're going to promote them or monitor the safety when they're buying them and pushing them? And they own patents on them? Of course not. So they did this. And then in 1992, Congress passed the Prescription Drug User Fee Act. And this, this is just terrifying. This is what facilitated the pharmaceutical industry's capture of the FDA. So you've already got NIH. NIH doles out $50 billion a year in research funds. It's the largest funder of research on the planet. I think there's another $10 billion to AIDS, which is unbelievable given that it's really not an issue anymore. But this is huge money, right? Huge money. And they only fund those who say what they want them to say. They're not funding people who are challenging the vaccine orthodoxy. They're not. Just like they're not funding climate change, questioners. So the Prescription Drug User Fee Act was the nail in the coffin for the FDA. And the reason for that is that the pharmaceutical industry was frustrated that they felt that their drugs weren't getting approved fast enough. And so they said, can we create this new facility where we can pay user fees to the FDA in order to expedite the review of our drugs? And the FDA said, sure, we can do that for what are termed unmet medical needs. So if there's something where there's nothing like it on the market, there's no treatment available for something on the market for this condition or disease, that's how they did it. Well, what's happened is it's basically just allowed pharma to fast track most of their products. And so the last time I checked, I think this data may be 2 years old, they paid $2.655 billion to the FDA, the pharmaceutical industry, in user fees in 2022 or 2023. And that actually amounted to 65% of the drug approvers' salaries.
When you say that, the 65%, does this money, in other words, it doesn't go directly into their pocket from the drug companies, right? It's just...
No, it goes to the FDA's pocket to pay the drug approvers.
Right. And Oh, the drug approvers, are those separate persons not within the FDA, but are they contractors or they are hired? No, they're hired by the FDA. They work the FDA.
Basically, pharma pays to nearly $3 billion in user fees to FDA. FDA takes those fees and pays their scientists and drug approvers salaries with that money.
And so the fast tracking of, I don't know what percentage of it.
Sorry to talk over you, but that's the excuse that they use. It's to fast track for unmet medical needs, but that's not what it's really about. It's to fast track, to push anything through,
profits.
Basically and it facilitated the full capture of FDA. So now FDA knows who butters their bread. It's the pharmaceutical industry. That's who pays their salaries.
All right. Now, so we went from the NIH with Bidol. We went, we completely went into the CDC with the National Childhood Vaccine Injury Act in '86. And then we got the FDA in 1992. All the dominoes are in place, or the bricks are building the wall, whatever. This corruption, and we have to close on this. This corruption that this amazing team that RFK Jr. Put together at the behest of President Donald Trump, how are we going to end this? Because the regulations, these agencies use regulations to bypass having to be accountable to Congress. You know what that is all about, because Congress basically gave over their authority and their power to regulatory agencies, to the bureaucrats. And now that's being brought back because of Supreme Court decisions, the Chevron deference case, for instance. So, but what we have today is these agencies are still captured. We're seeing it's insane what's happening right now with 1,000 persons within which agency are threatening to quit unless RFK Jr. quits. As if is that CDC. I don't know. It's the CDC. Thank you. Please quit, people. But
exactly
what will happen if RFK Jr. goes is we will and when President Trump leaves office and RFK Jr. is now, it's going to be a lottery. Are we going to make sure that we are going to nullify or overturn these three acts? 100%. We need to end them, because if it's only done through a regulatory process, it can be reversed in 4 years, 8 years, or whatever.
This is why I wrote and pushed the Idaho Medical Freedom Act, worked so hard to get that passed this year, because the federal government is not going to save us. I just don't believe it's going to. And for some of the reasons you just pointed out. However, health laws are state laws. They are reserved to the states in the Constitution. Anything that's not expressly delegated to the federal government in the Constitution is reserved to the states. And chief amongst those are the police powers, and part of the police powers are the health powers. And so we have to do this on the state level. And what a lot of people don't know is that in 2001, on the very day that the Patriot Act was signed, the Model State Emergency Health Powers Act legislation was introduced, and it's now been passed in whole or part in over 40 states. And what that legislation did, amazingly, you won't believe this, how unbelievably prescient of them, it conferred extraordinary power to state governors and state health departments in the event of a public health emergency. Wasn't that convenient? Well, they introduced it in 2001, and then they started getting it passed in the states. And so my bill basically preempts